The most dangerous person in your life may never tell you what to do. They don't need to. They make you feel guilty for saying no. They disappear when you disagree with them. They change their behavior just enough to make you question where you stand. They compare you to other people. And eventually, you start changing your behavior before they even ask. You think you're making your own decisions. You're not. At least, not entirely. Because psychological control isn't always about forcing someone to obey you. Sometimes, it's about making them afraid of what happens when they don't. And once you understand the games people use to create that fear, you'll start noticing something disturbing. The people with the most control over you may be the ones who never appear controlling at all. These are 7 psychological games people play when they want control. The first game is confusion. Because if someone can make you uncertain, they can make you focus on them. They may be warm one day and distant the next. They tell you they want something, then criticize you when you give it to them. They change their explanation depending on the situation. And suddenly, you're analyzing everything. Did I do something? Why did they change? What do they actually want from me? Instead of evaluating their behavior, you start trying to decode it. That's important because uncertainty consumes attention. When you know where you stand, you can make a decision. When you don't, your mind keeps returning to the problem. You replay conversations. You analyze their tone. You look for hidden meanings. You wonder whether you've somehow caused the change. And if the person occasionally returns to being warm or affectionate, the cycle becomes even more powerful. Confusion, then reassurance. Distance, then attention. You never know which version of the person you're going to get. So you become invested in getting the good version back. The psychological trap is that you believe understanding them will restore stability. But the more time you spend trying to understand them, the more attention you give them. And attention is a form of psychological leverage. The important question isn't always, why are they acting this way? Ask yourself, why has this person's behavior made me spend so much time trying to figure them out? Because sometimes the confusion isn't a side effect of the relationship. It's what keeps you engaged in it. The second game controls your choices through guilt. Instead of telling you what you can or cannot do, the person makes you feel like a bad person for wanting to do it. You say no. They respond, after everything I've done for you. You make an independent decision. They say, I guess you don't care about me anymore. You establish a boundary. Suddenly, you're selfish. Notice what happened. The original issue disappeared. Now you're defending your character. This is what makes guilt so effective. A normal disagreement is about behavior. Manipulative guilt turns it into a judgment about your morality. Your boundary becomes cruelty. Your independence becomes rejection. Your disagreement becomes disrespect. And eventually, you start anticipating the guilt before making decisions. You don't ask, what do I actually want? You ask, how will they react if I do this? That is the shift. You're technically still free to choose. But the emotional cost of choosing independently has become so high that you begin restricting yourself. The person doesn't need to control your decisions directly. They only need to make certain decisions feel too expensive to make. And eventually, you start choosing what keeps them comfortable rather than what you actually want. Silence isn't automatically manipulation. Sometimes people need space. The difference is what happens when silence becomes a repeated punishment for disagreement. A healthy person can say, I need some time to calm down. We'll talk later. A controlling person may simply disappear. No explanation, no time frame, no resolution. You're left waiting for them to decide when communication resumes. At first, you may be angry, then confused, then anxious. Eventually, you reach out. You apologize. You explain yourself. You compromise. And suddenly, they're back. The conflict is over. But something else has happened. A psychological association has been created. Disagreement leads to withdrawal. Compliance brings them back. The next time conflict appears, you remember what happened. So you avoid it. You choose your words carefully. You stop challenging certain behaviors. You become more agreeable, not because they convinced you, because you learn what happens when you don't cooperate. This is why silence can become a form of control. The goal isn't simply to end communication. It's to make you associate independence with emotional punishment. And once that association is established, the person may not have to withdraw as often. You begin censoring yourself before they ever need to. Some people maintain control by making sure you can never quite satisfy them. You apologize, but the apology wasn't sincere enough. You change your behavior, but now they're criticizing you for changing. You fix the original problem, Suddenly, there's another one. The standard keeps moving. This creates a particularly effective psychological trap because you believe you're always one improvement away from finally earning approval. So you keep trying. You explain more. You compromise more. You give more. But the finish line never arrives. One person becomes the evaluator. The other becomes the person constantly trying to pass the test. And the longer this continues, the more invested you become in proving yourself. Eventually, you don't wait for criticism. You anticipate it. You start correcting yourself before anyone says anything. You think about what they might object to. You change your behavior preemptively. The external pressure has become internal. And that's the real danger. You no longer need someone standing over you telling you that you're failing. You have learned to do it yourself. The fifth game attacks something more fundamental. Your confidence in your own perception. You remember an argument. They insist it happened differently. You remember what they said. They claim you misunderstood. You explain why their behavior hurt you. They focus entirely on how you reacted. Eventually, the conversation stops being about what happened. It becomes a debate over whether you can trust your own interpretation of what happened. Now, people genuinely remember events differently. Memory is imperfect. Two people can experience the same situation and honestly disagree about it. So one disagreement doesn't prove manipulation. The pattern is what matters. If every confrontation ends with you questioning yourself while the other person never examines their own behavior, something has changed. You become defensive, then uncertain, then confused. Eventually, you may start asking, maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm the problem. And that creates dependence. Because if you stop trusting your own judgment, you become more dependent on someone else's. The deepest form of psychological control isn't always telling you what to believe. It's making you distrust your ability to decide what is true. The sixth game introduces another person. An ex, a friend, a coworker, a family member, someone who can be used as a comparison. My ex never had a problem with this. Other people understand me. Everyone else appreciates what I do. Suddenly, you're no longer dealing with the original issue. You're competing, and the third person may not even know they're part of the game. That's what makes triangulation so effective. It activates insecurity. You begin comparing yourself. Am I less attractive? Less interesting? Less valuable? Do they prefer this person? Could I be replaced? Once those questions appear, your behavior can change. You try harder. You become more accommodating. You give more attention. You become less willing to challenge the person. The controller doesn't have to demand anything. They've created the possibility of competition, and you respond to it yourself. Human beings are highly sensitive to social status and rejection. We constantly monitor where we stand with other people. Someone who understands this can exploit it simply by making your position feel uncertain. And once you start fighting to maintain your position, they have leverage. The final game is the most powerful because it combines several of the others. Attention, affection, approval, and unpredictability. Someone is extremely warm when you behave the way they want. They praise you. They give you attention. They make you feel valued. Then you disagree. Suddenly, they're cold, distant, unavailable. Eventually, you return to the behavior they prefer, and the warmth comes back. The pattern is simple. Compliance produces reward. Resistance produces withdrawal. You may not consciously recognize what is happening, but your behavior begins adapting to the pattern. You become careful. You avoid certain subjects. You suppress disagreements. You learn which version of yourself receives affection. And unpredictability can make the cycle even stronger. If affection is always available, you don't have to think about it. But when affection appears and disappears unpredictably, you may become intensely focused on getting it back. The relationship begins to feel incredibly intense. But intensity isn't necessarily intimacy. Sometimes, intensity is the psychological result of instability. The relief you feel when the person returns can feel like love. The affection after distance can feel more powerful because it follows deprivation. And that's where the other 6 games connect. Confusion keeps you searching. Guilt keeps you complying. Silence makes you afraid of disagreement. Moving goalposts keep you trying. Reality distortion makes you question yourself. Triangulation makes you compete. And reward and withdrawal teach you which behavior will earn approval. The person doesn't need to control every decision. They only need to shape the consequences surrounding your decisions. These 7 tactics look different, but underneath them is the same principle. Control becomes easier when someone can manipulate what you fear losing. Your approval, your relationship, your social position, your sense of certainty, your confidence in yourself, your access to someone's affection. That's why psychological control can be difficult to recognize. It doesn't always look like a threat. Sometimes it looks like disappointment. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like concern. Sometimes it looks like comparison. Sometimes it even looks like love. And this is why you shouldn't judge these behaviors individually. One episode doesn't tell you much. Patterns do. Pay attention to what happens when you say no. What happens when you disagree? What happens when you become independent? What happens when you stop giving someone the reaction they want? If the response repeatedly involves punishment, guilt, confusion, withdrawal, or retaliation, you're no longer looking at an isolated interaction. You're looking at a system. The most effective psychological control doesn't take your freedom away. It changes what you're willing to do with it. You stop saying certain things. You avoid certain decisions. You anticipate reactions. You seek approval. You question yourself. And eventually, you may mistake adaptation for choice. That's the part worth remembering. The question isn't always, is this person trying to control me? A better question is, who am I becoming because of the way this person behaves? Because control becomes most powerful when you stop noticing that you're being controlled. You don't need a cage if you've learned to stay inside it. And sometimes, the person holding the key isn't the person standing outside. It's you.